Realm of the Deities by Dakota Storm Bogan Thompson. Prologue. After many years of travelling and research, 3 decades of toil and strain, I had finally found what I was looking for. I had heard as a child of the stories of the Realm of the Deities, an apparently mythical place where the gods of yore had resided, a place where they could interact. It is also the place where they apparently died. According to legend, a Chinese man over 1,000 years ago had returned from the wilderness and told a story to his family and friends. He had told of a tunnel in the side of a cliff, within a valley full of flowers and tall grasses. This tunnel had apparently led for around a mile, until it opened out into a field of corn. Through this corn, a path of marble slabs led to the gates of an immense wall. The Chinese man had entered an enormous city of wonders, where there were huge marble buildings and statues. This city, he had said, was in ruin. There were fires and overgrown plants, and the smell of death had filled the air. The Chinese man had described the way huge bodies were left scattered around the streets and beneath rubble, and how they had looked so fresh, yet plants had grown upon them and seemingly been there for what he judged to be many years. After passing many of these bodies, he had come to a building which, though scorched, had apparently retained much of its grandeur. Entering this building, he had found more bodies, as well as many strange creatures. Seeing these creatures, he fled from the building and had raced back to the earth, and what he hoped was reality. My name is Harry Trident. I have been searching for the Realm of the Deities. Part 1. My discovery occurred quite suddenly. I had been reading a book about the geographical changes that had occurred in the last 2,000 years in China. It was old and scuffed and scarred, but I had found it to be an interesting read. I was setting it down when I lost my grip on it, and as it fell, I swiped at it and managed to grab it by the front cover. As I raised it, I noticed that one of the pages had a folded corner. I had bought the book at a charity shop some years previous, and had always taken it with me in case I was bored. I read the page and discovered that it contained a surprising piece of information. An arrow pointed at a thin line, almost completely hidden from the air by trees. A small paragraph referred to the story that I'd heard many years ago, saying that it was almost impossible to find such things that were described in stories and legends. The photograph had been used as an example of the Chinese satellite system. Having heard accounts of the valley, I wondered if anyone had been down to this particular place. I began planning for my next trip to China. I would go alone and ask a guide to take me into this particular area. As we walked, I would blaze the trail every 10 feet or so with a canister of orange spray chalk. Once we'd arrived, I would pay the guide and ask him to leave. From that point, I'd be completely alone and would search for the tunnel which led to the Realm of the Deities. I had a feeling deep inside my gut, a feeling of surety. The valley was in the Wangguo forest. Using an online satellite view of the area, I judged that the valley would be approximately 1 mile from the nearest road. I would take with me a small metal kettle and a sieve, 3 weeks' worth of dehydrated food, a bar of soap and a flannel, 2 tubes of toothpaste and my toothbrush, a large box of tea, a small pop-up tent, a climbing stick, several changes of clothes, my lucky rabbit's foot, which I had had since I was a boy, a pair of binoculars, and a small case of sample tubes. I would also take with me a box of vitamin pills and a satellite phone. I bought my ticket on the internet. My flight was in 2 days, so I had plenty of time to prepare. I'd been camping since the age of 10. Both me and my father had fished in the spring. He was a professor of medicine at the University of Gloucester. He was a tall man and well known in his field. He had a brother called Graham, but he died some years prior to my conception. Apparently, he'd fallen while moving his television aerial and broken his neck. My mother was a cook, and an excellent one at that. She had a knack for making cakes of any flavour. Her speciality was a spicy type of cupcake, which she called muster cake. She'd mix 2 tablespoons of mustard into a plain mix, along with half a teaspoon of white pepper. When you tasted them, they were intensely strong, and guests of ours would find them to be unbearably spicy. Sometimes one of her cakes would have a small lump of mustard in it, and my father's face would turn bright red, and he'd blow air through his moustache and say, "Call blimey, Bridget, I think I've eaten TNT." I organised a taxi to meet me at the airport, where it would immediately take me to the guide's cabin, where he lived alone. There I would rest for the day and night, and we'd set off in the early morning. My guide's name was Zhang Wei Tan Huang. He would be paid £12,000 in Chinese yuan. His website described him as amiable and patient, and that his family had all been guides. Several members apparently had led Wang Zhongyan, the last emperor of the Chinese 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms, through a forest, when on an expedition to capture a pair of firethroats. A firethroat, also known as David's ruby throat or Pierre David's orange throat, which is a type of nightingale. I hoped that I'd have the same quality of service that Wang Zhongyan had had, and that it wouldn't lead me to my equivalent of Tang's army. I paid my electricity, gas, and water bills for 3 months in advance, so that I wouldn't have to worry about it on my return home. I organised a cleaner to come in once a week and asked my neighbour to drive my car on occasion to stop the engine from seizing. I wondered to myself at the organisation of the whole trip, and what it would be like in the future. We'd probably all have implants in our brain, which would sort all of this out without even a second thought. 2 days after ordering my plane ticket, I boarded the Boeing 777-200 aircraft, went straight to my seat in first class, turned off my mobile phone, and promptly fell asleep, only waking once when the stewardess tried to gently put a soft cushion behind my head. Her badge told me her name was Susie. I like the name Susie. Part 2. I arrived at around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Chinese time. My pre-arranged taxi was waiting for me in the car park at the price of 200 yuan, or £23.26. China is a funny old place, full of oddities and wonders. I'd been to China quite a few times in my life, searching for the valley with the tunnel which led to the realm of the deities. It never ceases to amaze. The Great Wall of China, for instance, built over time to protect against the steppe and their polities. The most well-known sections of the wall were built by the Ming dynasty. One wonder of China is the Leshan Buddha, the largest stone Buddha in the world. It even has its own drainage system to combat wear. The Qingping market is a funny old place. They sell the strangest of things. My own taxi driver was an oddity, I suppose. He didn't speak whilst we were driving, and he was large and bulky. His face was too small for his head, and his hands were as immense as those of the largest gorillas. It took us about an hour to reach my guide's home, a peculiar building. It had log cabin walls and a partially tiled roof. The rest was made of corrugated metal, possibly iron judging from the rust. A corroded Suzuki Carry sat wasting away in the driveway. A plastic sheet replaced one of the left-hand windows. The taxi pulled up 10 feet from the building, and the Chinese man got out of his seat and unloaded my luggage. The taxi was extremely well kept. There wasn't a speck of dust to be seen. Clearly he held a great deal of pride in his vehicle. I gave him his fare, and as I turned to walk away, the taxi driver grabbed my arm and pulled me towards him. Both of us were around 6'3" and powerfully built, but I sensed that he had a reason for his action.
"Be wary," he said. "There are devils in this world, and those devils come in a variety of shapes and sizes, from the smallest insect to the mightiest man. We shall meet again. There is a reason for everything."
"Thank you," I returned. "I'll remember what you said." The taxi driver got back into his car and drove away slowly. As I turned away from the road, I was greeted by a small, thin Chinese man with big round glasses. He smiled and said, "Welcome, I am Zhang Wei Tanhang. Please, call me Zhang and come in." He was a gangly man. I sensed an air of mysticism about him. I thought about what the taxi driver had said, and I was beginning to wonder if he was right. What did he mean about meeting again? The strange guide led me into the house, which was lushly decorated. The walls had old Chinese paintings and framed parchments which I recognized as some sort of religious prayer. A meal of shit-cake fried rice with water chestnuts had been prepared for me on a small table in the living room. The guide took my bags and transported them to my room, which was bare save for a bed mat and a lamp. The guide poured some rice wine for us both, and we ate in silence. Once I'd finished my meal, Zhang took my plate and raced to the kitchen. He returned almost instantly with a large silver dish of spiced chicken chunks. Zhang, in order to show off, had made the spiced chicken extremely hot, to the point that it would have made any other man vomit up his meal. Thankfully, my mother's mustard cakes had prepared me for the heat. Zhang, in his greed, drank a little water after each mouthful, while I simply ate the chicken chunks. I decided to see just how far my guide's tolerance of spices would fare against a jar of Coleman's original mustard, which I'd brought with me fresh from the store in my coat. I took a wrapped spoon from my pocket and put some of the bright yellow condiment onto my side of the plate. I offered some to Zhang, who smiled triumphantly, as if the mustard was to actually cool my mouth. I've never seen anyone's face change so drastically. Zhang's face transformed from one of smugness to one of near panic as he swallowed a large amount of my condiment. I took an equally large portion of the mustard on a particularly spicy-looking chunk of chicken and ate it. Zhang looked as though he had swallowed liquid fire. His face was contorted, his nostrils flared, his eyes dripped, and his face was drenched in sweat. I, on the other hand, took the heat of the mustard in my throat before stretching. "What do you think of my mustard?" I asked Zhang. "It is very strong," he replied. "How do you even eat it?" "I'm British," I said. I went and sat in a chair on Zhang's decrepit porch while he glumly washed up the dishes. Zhang finally came out with a large bottle of baijiu and 2 glasses. I could see that Zhang thought he could beat me at drinking. What he didn't know was that I had been the only one in my university who had been able to walk in a straight line after 6 triple whiskies. I asked Zhang how long the trek to the valley would take, to which he replied that it would take around 2 hours, as there were a few ridges and a great many fallen trees. After half an hour of drinking the baijiu, Zhang was senseless, and I was still relatively clear-headed. I watched the stars appear slowly, and I retired to bed, leaving the limp form of my guide to his own devices. I awoke at dawn and readied myself for the day. Once having used the toilet facilities to relieve myself of a very heavy weight, which I believe had been the result of the previous night's meal, I dressed and went straight to the kitchen, where I made quick work at making 2 plates of bacon, eggs, and toast. Zhang stumbled in groggily from the porch and sat down at the living room table. "Sleep well?" I asked. Zhang looked at me with a look that could have killed. Straight before, he ran to the bathroom and vomited. When he returned to the table, I had begun to pull out my papers from a small case from my left breast pocket, so that I could study them. Some were photographs, and others were accounts of the valley. Zhang ate his meal in silence. Once finished, he washed the dishes and went to his bedroom and came back 10 minutes later, fresh and like a different man. "So," he said, "when do you want to leave?" "Now," I said.
I only need to collect my backpack and suitcase. Within minutes, we were walking through the Wangguo forest. Whilst walking, Zhang asked about what it was like in Britain and if I was married. I told him that Britain was a fine place to be when it wasn't affected by right-wing politics. I had been married once to a girl called Susan Cranbert, a beautiful woman with an excellent way with words. Sadly, she'd had schizophrenia and had thrown herself in front of a train. I'd been absolutely devastated. My life stopped for a whole year. As we walked on, I sensed a third presence. It felt like we were being followed. We crossed small streams and ridges and rocky places and climbed over large fallen trees. We had set off at around 6 in the morning, and we arrived at the valley at about 8:15. Once there, I hunted about for a small stream, which I discovered a short way from where I had decided to build my camp. I filled up a cup from the stream several times and sieved it through into my kettle and built a small fire. Once the water boiled, I made a cup of tea, and Zhang and I sat as happy as kings in front of the fire. Zhang left me soon after draining his cup, and I listened to his crunching footsteps as he walked away into the distance. I had arrived at the valley and felt ecstatic. I set up my tent and found a tree to hang my dried food in, which I'd stored in my suitcase. As I relaxed on the ground in front of my tent, I heard someone sniff. I raised myself up and, to my greatest astonishment, found the taxi driver standing with his arms crossed, looking into the valley. I knew that we were going to meet again, but I didn't think that it would be so soon, I said. I stood up and looked at him more closely. His facial features seemed to fit his face better than they had done previously, and he looked thoughtful. "What's your name?" I asked. "My name is Gaigu Fengbeo Zanshi. Yours is Hadi Trident," he replied. "Please, call me G." "Well," I said, "what are you here for?" "I am here as a bodyguard and a guide," he replied. "I know about the realm of the deities. It is a dangerous place. I found myself lost there one day as a small boy." "What was it like?" "You shall see soon enough." "When can you take me to the realm?" "Now," G said simply. "Let's go then," I said, putting on my leather coat and tweed trilby. I collected my equipment, comprising of a thermos flask, a powerful torch, 2 days' provisions, a hiking stick, a sleeping bag, and a machete for chopping away plants that might block the way. I motioned to G that I was ready, and we set off to the realm of the deities. Part 3. We hunted around the small valley for about half an hour before we found the mouth of the tunnel. The mouth was covered in small bushes and grasses and a thick layer of Parthenocissus tricuspidata, a flowering plant from the grape family. We made a small gap in the plant curtain and passed through. G closed the gap back up to hide our trail. When I inquired why he had done this, he explained his suspicions about Zhang as we walked in the tunnel. "He is not a good man, and he is not of a good family. It is said that his 24 times grandfather made a deal with a powerful Jaeguar, or a demon as you would say. A demon was called Qi Chuzia, Emperor of Chinese and Japanese demons. The deal was written in the blood of a virgin princess on a piece of dried flesh from the back of China's first emperor, Queen Shi Huang, and signed with the blood of the demon emperor's favorite steed, which was called Leng. The deal was that if Zhang's 24 times grandfather found the tunnel leading to the realm of the deities, this tunnel, then he would not hold his soul and his family's souls to ransom, and he would give their bloodline the ability to find any place at any time. Just out of interest, I said, what was Zhang's 24 times great-grandfather called? Zhang Wei Tanhuang, G replied. Traditional family name? I queried. The same man, said G. Oh dear, I said. The tunnel was dark, so we used my torch to find our way. Small stalactites hung from the ceiling, but did not hinder our path.
My torchlight glistened off the wall of the tunnel. Small minerals and gems were embedded in the walls, floor, and ceiling. Some were rubies, and others were emeralds, but I felt no interest in them. I simply wanted to find the realm of the deities and discover if the supposed fiction was actually fact. G stopped, picked up a large stone from the floor, and threw it ahead of us. A harsh twittering reached my ears, and we hurried forward. In the ground was a circular hole, within which was the remains of a crushed centipede creature. "My goodness," I said. "Do you know what you just killed?" "A monster," said G. "No," I said, "an Arthropleura, an extinct centipede from the Carboniferous period." "I fail to see the problem," my companion stated. "Never mind," I said. "Let's carry on." We walked along the tunnel for about an hour before we took a rest. "We are not far from the exit," said G. "We should carry on. There are more monsters that protect the tunnel, which I remember from my first coming here." I began to rise with G when all of a sudden something dropped onto me. A huge creature seized my arm and started trying to bite me. Luckily, my coat was made of leather and designed for wear and tear from climbing. G grabbed the creature by its back and crushed it to death. Further inspection of the monster revealed it to be a horribly mutated version of the Australasian bird-eating spider, otherwise called the whistling spider, which comes from its ability to hiss when provoked. This spider was the largest of its kind that I had personally ever seen. It was 2 feet in diameter and half a foot deep. We hurried on down the tunnel and soon saw light. Strange light. Long, thin stalactites broke away as we ran through the tunnel. We exited the tunnel and stared around at the shocking spectacle before us. The realm of the deities, said to be a place of undisputed beauty and splendor. That was certainly not what G and I saw. The mountains had been transformed into slowly seeping volcanoes. A deep rumble echoed through the air. The ground was covered in a black scab of cooled rock and veined with rivulets of molten lava. The air was heated to a nearly unbearable temperature and caused both me and G to sweat profusely. I could feel the beads of moisture form and drip down my face. All around us was a scene of which the most imaginative mind would struggle to recreate. Demons strode around and chewed on soft white flesh. These demons were horribly obese. Huge rolls of fat hung from them in 3-foot lengths. Smaller demons scurried around their obese comrades. The white flesh came from a long table where a creature, which was a mixture of bat and human, sat cutting various pieces of skin from a huge man. I believe this man was of the deities, for it was handsome and looked strong and noble. When the bat demon cut off the flesh from the thighs, upper arms, and belly, he threw the body into a pile of other bodies, the occupants of which seemed to be slowly regenerating, creating a never-ending food supply. Some demons were practicing torture on some of the dead deities, seeing which parts moved when they burned certain nerve bundles with white-hot spikes. Others were fighting amongst themselves, while others were feasting on the over-fattened bodies of various heinous demons. Shadows seemed to fly in the air like tortured souls. A constant droning of screams like an unholy choir, of which it likely was, filled the air. Truly the sights were terrifying. G's face was one of sorrow, pain, anger, and disgust. Yet he showed no fear. If it hadn't been for the assurance that my Chinese friend was there, then I would have likely turned and fled. My eyes drifted across the demon-filled landscape and soon settled on one that is familiar to all the men and women of the world who know of it. "Look!" I said quietly to G, pointing in the direction of the terrifying sight. "By Pangu," G mumbled to himself. Pangu is the first living being and creator of all others in some Chinese mythologies. In the midst of all of this anarchy sat a huge demon with red blistered skin, dressed in only a long leather loincloth, holding the hilt of an immense cutlass and its head resting on its fist. The demon sat in a chair made of blood-stained stone, possibly marble. The monster's head was hideous. It very nearly caused my stomach to expel my breakfast. The head was that of a shaved goat's, save for the one tuft of hair on the chin. The rest was as red and raw as the rest of the body, with large black eyes that were half closed. "Chichozia," I heard G gasp. I restudied the huge form and whispered to G, better known as Lucifer. Part 4. Both me and G began to slowly move backwards towards the tunnel, ready to fight off any of the creatures within. We began to turn around to face our escape route when a blade came whistling between our heads, causing us to freeze in astonishment. Zhang stood in front of the mouth of the tunnel, with an evil grin pasted on his small Chinese features. In one hand he held a shining cutlass, while the other was poised over a bag of small knives. His torso was armoured by a Spanish conquistador body shell, and his arms and legs were sheathed in woven wicker plates. Truly, he looked ridiculous. "Zhang," I said, "why do you block our path from this terrible place?" "No one is permitted to leave, otherwise my soul is taken by Chichozia, and my body and mind are stripped of their immortality, leaving me to be but a mere mortal like you." "He looks ludicrous," said G. "What did you say?" exclaimed Zhang. "We both think you look preposterous," I said. "I will kill you for your insult," Zhang stated. "I shall hang your vitals over my doorway for 20 weeks. G and I began to chuckle. "You laugh?" shrieked Zhang. "You shall suffer for this." A rumble filled the air, and when I turned around, Chichuzia had sat straight up in his immense seat and had crossed his arms.
"Zhang, be silent," boomed the Emperor Demon. "Both of these mortals deserve a chance to leave."
"No!" yelled Zhang. "The British one has already beaten my family's most treasured test of endurance." "Do you mean that quite mild chicken meal that you provided when I first arrived at your ramshackle hovel?" Zhang raised his sword and came at me with incredible speed. I stepped to my right as soon as the furious Chinese man came within a foot of me.
"Stop!" yelled Chichuzia. "You will do as you are told."
Chichuzia raised one open hand and closed it quickly. Zhang's sword disappeared in a puff of smoke. "No!" he said. "Do not take away the chance at killing my antagonists."
"I will do as I please," said the Emperor Demon.
All of the demons had stopped moving and were staring at us in anticipation.
"I will give both of these mortal men the opportunity to leave. Only one of them may fight. I will strip you, Zhang, of your immortality, and you shall face your opponent with only your body."
"I will fight him," said G. "No," I said. "I will." "How do we decide which one shall fight?" said G. "We shall flip a coin," I stated. I took a 2-pence piece out of my pocket, asked G which side he chose, to which he answered that his choice was heads. I flipped the coin high into the air, caught it, and slapped it onto the back of my arm. The result was tails. I would fight Zhang.
"It is decided,"
boomed Chichuzia.
"Tails wins."
Zhang sweated furiously in the heat, and slowly took off his armour and knife bag, while I took off my leather coat and tweed trilby hat. A group of demons had formed a 20-foot perimeter around us, and one particularly ugly creature held G by the shoulder.
"Fight,"
said Chichuzia.
"for your souls."
Zhang began twitching, and I watched him move towards me with quick, unpredictable movements. As he reached me, I grabbed him by the fist, which he had thrust towards my chest, and span him around several revolutions before letting him sprawl to the floor. Before he rose, I stripped my shirt off and raised my fists. The small Chinese man rushed towards me, kicked high into the air, his foot aimed for my face. I grabbed his foot and shoved him to the floor. Zhang rolled away and rose. My former guide shook himself and rushed at me, hitting me in the shoulder at incredible speed. I stumbled to one side but quickly regained my calm composure.
"Your opponent seems to be a better fighter than you, Zhang," laughed Chichu's.
"No, he is not better than me," said Zhang firmly. "I think I am," I said. The infuriated Chinaman rushed me, and I felt several quick punches to my chest and left shoulder. I ran at Zhang and grabbed him by his short hair, pulled him back and landed a blow to his cheekbone. Zhang fell to the floor and tried to roll away, but I kicked him in the chest as he rolled and sent him sprawling on the floor. Zhang rose from the ground, came at me and stopped short. He opened his mouth and yelled a loud war cry before punching me in the chest. I moved back as he lunged towards me and braced myself for what I was about to do. As Zhang was about to strike again, I grabbed him by the throat and raised his relatively light body into the air. As he gasped for breath, I let out a yell and slammed him into the ground, and kicked him once in the head with the tip of my steel toe-capped climbing boots, leaving a gash above his left eye. Zhang struggled to his feet and span towards me. The Chinaman darted from side to side, trying to desperately strike me. I moved back as he moved forward and led him in large circles around the demon arena. Zhang charged me and I fell deliberately onto my back, and as my opponent loomed over me and prepared to come down on top of me, I lifted him into the air with my feet and flung him over me. I got back up, and as Zhang rose up, I met his chin with a powerful right uppercut which lifted him into the air and sent him flying back down to the floor.
"Enough!"
boomed Chichu's.
"The British man has won. It is over, and his friend will be permitted to leave as well."
"No!" yelled Zhang. My former guide reached down to his knife bag and threw several towards me. I darted to one side and reached into my coat pocket. Pulling out a yellow jar, I rushed Zhang and unscrewed the lid. I held Zhang by the throat using my arm and emptied the contents of the jar into his shocked, gaping mouth, leaving him with a final humiliation. I rolled away from Zhang and watched as he span around and clutched his throat and face. Reaching towards the demon, he let out a torrent of shrieks and screams before vomiting and lying face down unconscious.
"Well done," congratulated Chichu's. "You have done well."
"Thank you," I answered. "May I ask one question?"
"You have earned the right," replied the Demon Emperor.
"Throughout religions and myths there are descriptions of you, and some are well detailed. My question is this. Are you the fallen angel Lucifer?"
"I have many names," Chichu's said. "This is one of them. Now, be gone, before I decide to take away your freedom."
I redressed, and both G and I quickly made for the tunnel. As we reached its mouth, I heard Zhang cry out, and I turned to see the formerly immortal guide slowly begin to burn and become a moving charred mess, which was then swiftly eaten. We suffered no difficulties in travelling through the tunnel. No spiders, extinct centipedes, or any other creatures attacked us. When we reached the valley, we walked quietly up to my camp, where I immediately lit a readied fire and set my kettle boiling with 2 tea bags in it. While it boiled, I raced back with a bag from my tent and threw a crucifix into the tunnel, and with G's help sprinkled a little holy water around the tunnel mouth. "Who taught you how to seal unholy places?" "A very old friend taught me how to do it. A man called Patrick Sycamore, one of the world's leading demonologists. He's had many run-ins with fallen angels and creatures." "He seems to have lived a dangerous life," said G. "Trust me," I said, "he has." We drank our tea and rested before I packed my equipment and started walking back to Zhang's cabin. Once there, we took anything that would burn and placed it in the hallway of the cabin. I lit a match and threw it onto the pile, and we left the cabin to burn. G took me to a hotel in his taxi, where I readied a plane ticket to go home the next day. We ate a hearty meal of noodles in a tomato soup and talked about what we had seen. "Why didn't you make yourself known to me before I met up with Zhang?" I asked.
"My friend," G began, "I work for a specific organization. When they gave me this assignment, I had to be sure you weren't a follower of Chichuzia.
What would you have done if I had been one of his followers? I would have killed you with a sacred knife, G replied. My friend Sycamore would like you, I laughed. We sat in silence for several minutes before I asked, Do you think we'll ever meet again? Perhaps, G replied. It was good to meet you. We stood up from our table and shook hands. I went to my hotel room to rest, while G left the building and drove off in his taxi.